Most men believe they lose a woman when she becomes distant, cold, or silent. But that's not where things usually fall apart. The real turning point happens much earlier, at the exact moment she starts reacting emotionally and the man doesn't understand what that reaction actually means. When a woman gets irritated over something small, goes quiet unexpectedly, or reacts with emotional intensity that feels out of proportion, most men interpret it as danger. They assume they've done something wrong. Their instinct kicks in immediately. Fix it, explain it, smooth it over, restore calm. What they don't realize is that this reaction from her isn't the beginning of disinterest. It's often the beginning of attachment. This is the moment most men misunderstand because it feels uncomfortable. Emotional tension feels like instability, and men are taught to eliminate instability as quickly as possible. But in male-female dynamics, emotional tension doesn't automatically mean something is broken. Sometimes it means something has just become real. A woman who doesn't care doesn't react. She stays neutral. She observes, but she isn't emotionally moved. When her mood starts shifting because of your presence or your absence, that's not indifference. That's involvement. The mistake isn't her reaction. The mistake is panicking when it happens. This moment isn't a threat to your position. It's often the first sign that you actually have one. Most men hear emotional reactions and immediately think one thing: rejection. They assume something is slipping away, interest is fading, control is being lost. But that assumption is backward. A woman who is losing interest doesn't react emotionally. She doesn't get irritated. She doesn't feel disappointed. She doesn't read into small details. She simply detaches. Her emotions go quiet because you no longer register strongly enough to disturb her internal state. Emotional reactions only appear once attachment has already begun. Before that point, your actions are neutral. You reply late, no reaction. You're busy, no reaction. You pull back slightly, no reaction. But once she's emotionally invested, those same behaviors stop being neutral. They start creating internal tension, not because you did something wrong, but because your presence now carries weight. This is why emotional reactions feel confusing. They seem negative on the surface, but psychologically, they signal involvement. Her emotions are responding faster than her logic. She may not even understand why something bothered her, only that it did. That confusion is not manipulation. It's exposure. The problem is that most men treat emotional reactions as rejection instead of recognition. They rush to correct, reassure, and explain, trying to win back a position they never actually lost. In doing so, they turn emotional involvement into emotional imbalance. Rejection is quiet. Indifference is calm. Emotion, even uncomfortable emotion, is proof of connection. Once you understand that distinction, you stop fearing reactions and start reading them correctly. The moment emotional tension appears, most men react on instinct, and that instinct is what costs them control. From a young age, men are conditioned to believe that emotional discomfort means something is wrong and that it's their responsibility to fix it. If someone is upset, you calm them down. If there's tension, you resolve it. If emotions rise, you de-escalate. This mindset works in many areas of life. It works in business, teamwork, friendships, and crisis situations. But in romantic dynamics, this same instinct often backfires. When a woman reacts emotionally, most men assume they've failed some invisible test. They feel pressure to restore harmony immediately. So they explain themselves too quickly, they apologize too much, they soften their tone, rush their responses, and try to bring everything back to how it was before emotion entered the picture. What they don't realize is that attraction doesn't come from emotional comfort. It comes from emotional certainty. By rushing to remove tension, a man unknowingly trades stability for approval. He shifts from being grounded to being reactive. Instead of holding his position, he starts chasing emotional balance, and that subtle shift changes the entire dynamic. The irony is this: the instinct to fix the situation feels caring, but it often communicates insecurity. It signals that emotional pressure affects him more than it should. And once that pattern is set, control quietly slips away, not because she demanded it, but because he handed it over without realizing it. When a woman reacts emotionally, the power shift doesn't happen because of her reaction. It happens because of how most men respond to it. The moment a man rushes to explain himself, apologize excessively, or restore emotional calm, he unknowingly changes his position. He moves from being steady to being responsive, from grounded to approval seeking. And that shift is subtle enough that most men never notice it happening. Here's the key truth: emotional reactions do not automatically create imbalance. Overcorrection does. When you hurry to smooth things over, you silently communicate that her emotional state now determines your behavior. You teach her, without words, that discomfort moves you, that tension makes you bend, and that emotional pressure gets results. This isn't something she consciously decides. It's something the dynamic teaches her over time. This is why many men say, "She changed after that moment." In reality, the rules changed. Not because she wanted control, but because control was offered. The dangerous part is that this power shift feels like care. It feels like maturity. It feels like doing the right thing. But psychologically, it places you beneath the emotional frame instead of holding your own. And once that position is established, attraction struggles to survive there. Not because women want dominance, but because emotional safety doesn't come from control. It comes from stability. The power shift isn't forced, it's self-inflicted. And once you recognize that, you realize how easily it could have been avoided, simply by staying grounded instead of reactive. One of the biggest mistakes men make is assuming that a woman's emotional reaction is an attempt to control them. It usually isn't. In most cases, it's the opposite. A reaction is not dominance. A reaction is exposure. When a woman reacts emotionally, it means she's been affected before she's had time to think. Her emotions responded faster than her logic. That's why you'll often hear phrases like, "I don't even know why that bothered me." She's not pretending. At that moment, she genuinely doesn't fully understand her own response. Control is deliberate. Reaction is instinctive. Before emotional investment forms, your actions are processed intellectually. She notices them, but they don't disturb her internal balance. Once attachment begins, that balance becomes sensitive. Small things feel bigger, not because she wants leverage, but because her ego and emotions are now involved. This is where most men misread the situation. They see emotional intensity and assume manipulation, pressure, or loss of attraction. In reality, what they're seeing is vulnerability. She has allowed you inside her emotional world enough for your behavior to matter. The danger isn't her reaction. The danger is treating vulnerability like a power play. When a man responds with panic, excessive reassurance, or emotional collapse, he turns her exposure into control. But when he stays calm and grounded, her reaction remains what it was meant to be: a signal, not a weapon. Understanding this difference changes everything. It allows you to respond with clarity instead of fear, and presence instead of submission. Most men feel relieved when a woman stops reacting. No tension, no mood shifts, no emotional friction. Everything feels calm again. But that calm is often misunderstood. Emotional silence is not stability, it's detachment. A woman who is emotionally invested cannot stay neutral. Her emotions move because there is something to lose. When she reacts, whether through irritation, distance, or emotional tone, it means your presence is still active in her inner world. Something is being felt, processed, and weighed. When she stops reacting altogether, that's when the danger appears. Silence means expectations have faded. Emotional investment has withdrawn. Your actions no longer disrupt her internal balance, so they no longer require a response. You can be distant. You can be inconsistent. You can disappear for a day, and nothing shifts. That's not peace. That's emotional disengagement. Emotion creates friction, but friction only exists when there is contact. No contact means no reaction. This is where men get it backwards. They fear emotional reactions and feel safe in emotional quiet. But emotional quiet is often the final stage before disconnection. It's predictable, it's calm, and it's empty. You don't lose a woman when she reacts emotionally. You lose her when she feels nothing at all. Once you understand that, Emotional reactions stop feeling like threats and start looking like signs of life in the connection. This is where theory becomes real because most men recognize themselves in moments like this. A man is seeing a woman consistently. There's no pressure, no drama, no games. Things feel smooth. One evening, he doesn't reply to a message, not intentionally. He's busy, focused, living his life. He goes to sleep without sending an explanation. The next morning, he wakes up to a message with emotional weight. Not anger, not accusation, just tension. Something subtle like, guess I'm not that important anymore. This is the moment most men panic. They rush to explain. They apologize repeatedly. They try to erase the tension as fast as possible. But in this case, he didn't. He responded calmly and briefly. No urgency, no defensiveness, no emotional charge, just clarity and presence. He was busy, and he checked in without trying to manage her feelings. What happened next is the part most men don't expect. Her tone softened. The edge disappeared. She began explaining herself. She admitted she didn't know why she reacted that way. She even acknowledged her own insecurity in that moment. Nothing changed because of clever words. Everything changed because he stayed emotionally steady while her emotions moved. That contrast forced self-regulation. His calm didn't push her away. It gave her space to step forward on her own. That's not dominance. That's presence. And presence is what stabilizes attraction when emotions rise. Most men think emotional strength means shutting down, going silent, or becoming distant when tension appears. Others believe it means taking control, asserting dominance, or forcing clarity. Both are misunderstandings. Emotional strength is not emotional absence, it's emotional steadiness. A grounded man doesn't ignore emotions and he doesn't absorb them either. He acknowledges what's happening without letting it shake his center. His tone stays calm. His timing stays measured. His words stay simple and clean. There is no rush in his responses, no urgency to be understood, no need to convince. He doesn't over-apologize to relieve pressure, and he doesn't over-explain to regain approval. He speaks when it's necessary, not when tension demands it. This kind of strength often shows up in small, neutral observations rather than emotional arguments. Simple statements like, "You don't usually react like this," or "Something seems off. What's on your mind?" do more than long explanations ever could. Why? Because they don't reward emotional pressure and they don't reject emotion either. They place responsibility back where it belongs. Emotional strength communicates certainty. It tells her you're not afraid of discomfort, you're not threatened by emotion, and you don't need her emotional approval to remain grounded. That certainty creates safety, not control. And safety is what allows attraction to deepen instead of collapse when emotions rise. Having the advantage in a single moment is easy. Keeping it over time is where most men fail. Short-term leverage appears when a woman reacts emotionally. In that moment, your response matters more than your words, but that advantage is fragile. It can either turn into long-term stability or disappear instantly, depending on who needs reassurance more. A man loses long-term control the moment he starts needing her reactions to feel steady, the moment he needs immediate clarity, the moment he needs to be understood right now so the tension will stop. That need quietly erodes his presence. Long-term control isn't about staying distant or withholding emotion. It's about not chasing emotional certainty. It's about allowing moments of tension to exist without rushing to resolve them for your own comfort. When a man is grounded in himself, her emotions don't threaten him. They inform him. He doesn't overcorrect. He doesn't panic. He doesn't try to lock her in emotionally. And paradoxically, that's what keeps the dynamic balanced. The more a man shows he can remain centered without reassurance, the more emotional weight his presence carries. Control doesn't come from force or silence. It comes from self-regulation. And once that foundation is set, emotional reactions stop destabilizing the relationship. They become signals, clear, readable, and manageable, because you're no longer reacting from fear. 10. Why emotional independence creates attraction, approx 200 words. Emotional independence is one of the most misunderstood traits in dating. Many men hear it and assume it means being careless, detached, or emotionally unavailable. In reality, it means something very different. Emotional independence means your sense of stability does not depend on another person's moods, reactions, or approval. A man who is emotionally independent still cares. He still listens. He still engages. But his center doesn't shift every time emotion enters the room. His calm isn't borrowed from her reassurance. It comes from within. This is why emotional independence creates attraction instead of distance. A woman feels safest with a man whose emotional state is consistent. When she knows he won't collapse under pressure, overreact to tension, or panic when emotions rise, she relaxes. She doesn't need to control. She doesn't need to test. She doesn't need to pull away to feel stable. Paradoxically, the less a man fears losing her, the more valuable his presence becomes. Not because he's indifferent, but because his identity doesn't shrink when discomfort appears. Attraction doesn't grow where there is emotional dependence. It grows where there is emotional strength. And emotional independence is the foundation of that strength, quiet, steady, and deeply grounding for both people involved. Most men believe they lose women because attraction fades, circumstances change, or effort isn't enough. But more often than not, the real reason is simpler and harder to accept. They panic at the exact moment attraction deepens. When emotions first appear, when tension enters the dynamic, when a woman starts reacting instead of staying neutral, that's usually not the beginning of the end. It's the beginning of attachment. But because emotional friction feels uncomfortable, most men misinterpret it as danger. They try to eliminate the discomfort instead of understanding it. They apologize for existing. They explain themselves excessively. They chase clarity and reassurance, believing that calm equals safety. In doing so, they slowly dismantle their own position. The tragedy is that nothing was actually wrong. The emotional reaction wasn't a sign of rejection. It was proof that they mattered. But fear turned that moment into a collapse, not because she demanded control, but because he surrendered it. This is why so many men look back confused, wondering how things changed so quickly. The answer isn't in her behavior. It's in his response to her vulnerability. Once you understand this truth, you stop fighting emotional moments. You stop fearing tension, and you stop destroying advantages you didn't even realize you had. Attraction doesn't die in chaos. It dies in panic. At the deepest level, this isn't about dating strategies, emotional techniques, or controlling outcomes. It's about self-mastery. When you try to manage the dynamic, you give it power over you. When you try to manage her emotions, you make them your responsibility. And the moment you need the situation to resolve a certain way so you can feel steady again, you've already lost your center. Mastery begins when you stop reacting automatically. A man who controls himself doesn't fear emotional moments. He doesn't rush to escape tension, and he doesn't cling to comfort. He allows emotions to rise and fall without letting them define his behavior. His presence stays consistent whether things feel smooth or uncertain. That consistency does more than any explanation ever could. It creates respect, it creates safety, and it creates attraction that doesn't need to be chased or maintained through effort. This isn't about winning her. Winning creates anxiety because it can be lost. Presence doesn't. When you master your reactions, pressure stops being a threat. When you stop needing emotional certainty, the dynamic stabilizes on its own. And when you stop trying to hold on tightly, connection naturally deepens. The moment you become grounded in yourself, the relationship no longer needs managing. It responds to who you are.